Good morning, George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. In this video, I want to touch on one aspect of optimizing access interfaces for remote SQL Server or SQL Azure. Optimization is actually a multifaceted process. It includes everything from appropriate indexing on your tables through fine-tuning your network and some specific things you can do in the access interface. I'm going to focus primarily on optimizing forms in an access interface to minimize the number of records that must be pulled back from the server or written back to the server. Let's begin. This is the sample database we'll use for this presentation. It is the Lander Trail Foundation's mobile library. By the way, notice that I call it a mobile library. That's because there is a second interface written in Power Apps, which links to the same SQL Server tables. That allows the same set of data to be used both in the desktop environment here, or on a tablet, on a smartphone, or in a browser. If you're interested in this mobile library, I will add a link in the description to the playlist in which I have documented many of the features that go into this mobile library. The application opens to a main menu, which is actually a form with an embedded subform, and you can see the gray outline. I've put a gray outline around the subform so you can identify it more easily. When I select an item from the ribbon, the subform in this menu is replaced with the appropriate subform for that topic or that subject. For example, if I select books, the subform is replaced with the books form. Notice that when it opens, there are 0 selected records in the publications dropdown, and there are no records in the subform itself. We have opened the form with the minimum amount of data pulled from the server. The categories dropdown, or combo box, is, however, fully populated with all of the categories available to us in our database. The Google Books catalog offers a default category when you find a book there. Those are applied here, but there are additional categories that the Lander Trail Foundation wanted to apply. And it's possible for a book to be categorized under 2 or more categories as well. If I select a category from the dropdown, and there are roughly 300 and some categories, that is a cascading combo box design which populates 1 or more records into the publications table. So let's look at that as an example. I'm going to pick, I know some books in there. 45 books have been categorized under Mormon History Church. A second way in which I apply a filter is through the first letter of the first significant word in each title. For example, within this selection, we have a book starting with the letter D. If I click the letter D, it filters this list down to 2. Again, the goal is always to minimize the number of records retrieved from the server. If I select this negative, it applies the filter so that no records return. Or if I apply the wildcard search, which the percentage sign is the wildcard search in SQL Server queries, it filters this category for all available books. Showing these to demonstrate the idea that what we want to do is limit the choices to a user to the smallest number possible to satisfy their search criteria. If I select a book from this list, and I will just pick, there's one interesting. Now our form for the books, has one and only one record in it. So now you've had an overview of how the filtering works to limit the number of records retrieved from the server to the smallest number possible to meet our current criteria. Let's look at how this is all accomplished. I'll close the main menu so that it's out of the way. Open the navigation pane. Select our publications form. Open it in design view. Minimize this. Let's open the property sheet for the form and look at the row source for the categories. Note that there was a name change from the initial version of this application. I had originally called it genre. That's a broader term than category, but the client wanted to call it category, so I changed it in the interface without revising the entire table schema. 0 is selected if we're going to show all categories, or the actual ID field, the record ID for the genre, if one is selected by the user. The total number of records in this table, there are actually 542 categories. The after update event of that combo box runs this code. The after update event for combo filter category. First, it creates or updates a temp var called alpha first char. That represents the first character of the first significant word in each book title. It is taken from the current value of a control called text. The default value is going to be the wildcard. Then we call a sub and pass it some variables. We pass it the currently selected category, if there is one. If it's not been selected yet, we pass the default value 0. The next value will be either 0 or 1, depending on whether or not we've selected all categories. And remember, the default value of 0 is the all categories, or a specific category. And you'll see in a minute why we need to know which of those two options was selected. And the third argument passed to our procedure is the temp var value just set here. After this procedure has run, then we're going to requery the select publication combo box. Let's look at how this works. Public sub takes 3 arguments: the current the current category, whether or not we're going to show or hide, and that's used in the stored procedure later. That's going to be a 0 or a 1, and the initial filter character, which would be one of the alphabet characters, the wildcard, or the non-search, the hash mark that I used to say return nothing. We're going to rewrite the SQL in a pass-through query. The name of that pass-through query is filter pubs by genre. That SQL will be execute a procedure, a stored procedure in SQL Server, giving it 3 parameters: the category ID, whether or not we want the show hide to be valid, and the initial character if we're passing one. We update the SQL in that query, and we're ready to return to the previous procedure that called it, where we requery the combo box. A couple of things we need to look at here. The row source for the select publication combo box is that pass-through query which we just rewrote the SQL for, filter pubs by genre. We rewrite the SQL in that pass-through query and then requery the combo box where it is the row source. That gives us the list of matching book titles. We also passed in some other variables, so let's look at those. We'll pop this subform out and look at it. The way this works could be an entire presentation on its own. The way it works is that the caption of each of these small command buttons is the letter in the alphabet, or my wildcard, or my no search character. The click event fires this code. Filter book list is a function which accepts one argument. That argument is the caption of the command button which invoked this function. The first step in this function is to determine which control was clicked, which control invoked this code, and we set a variable to the value of that control. Then we change the background and text color of all of the controls on the form to the default, which is a brown color for the back color and white text on each button. Then we go back to our control which called this function and set it to our highlight color. The background is yellow, the text color is black. We go to our parent form and set the value of this text box to the value of the letter. If you go back to earlier part of the presentation, you will recall that we used the value in this text box control to filter the publication list on the initial letter of the first significant word in each title. And as I belatedly realized, I had misspelled text, and it's called test, and I'll note that for revision too. The final step is to run the same function we ran earlier, the same sub we had run earlier, on the combo box for the category filter. You've seen this before. We pass in 3 arguments, which category we're going to filter on, if any, whether we're looking for all records, and the letter of that first significant word in each title. After that has run, we go back to the parent and refilter the combo box. This gives us 2 paths: refilter the publication combo box. We can do it either by selecting the value of the first letter to filter by, or we can filter by category. Now, if both of these options have been used, they will combine in the stored procedure to filter further, so that we always have the smallest possible number of matching records in our publication list that meet our filter criteria. 2 more things to look at, and then we're done. That was kind of special. As I was recording this section previously, I didn't realize that a helicopter was flying overhead making a lot of noise, drowning out my voice. So I had to ditch that whole section and start over. We initially start with no records in the publications drop-down and no records in the form. Ideally, we do not want to bring any more records into this form than we absolutely have to. However, I did configure it so that it's possible to request all of the records. Remember that this particular database has 1,929 records, fewer than 2,000. Performance is not going to be abysmal with that many records. If your record source contains 19,000 records or 190,000 records, you may well want to avoid allowing a user to pull in the entire record source, and you would not enable this option. However, by way of demonstrating what's possible, I set it up so that if you select all categories, the wildcard, and then select all publications, this database will retrieve all publications into this subform. Note that even though this SQL Server database resides on a hosted SQL Server out in the cloud, other optimization that I have implemented, things like indexing the tables and using stored procedures and pass-through queries rather than filtered queries in Access allow me to get really decent performance in this environment. As I just said, though, if your record counts are 19,000 or 190,000, you probably will not want to expose that particular option. With that said, let's go back and look at the SQL Server to see how that stored procedure implements filtering on the combination of category, initial letter, and whether or not we want to use the show all or hide all override. Let's open the stored procedure. The stored procedure accepts three parameters. First is the category ID or genre ID, which is an integer, default to 0. Show all is a bit field, which we're going to interpret as true or false, 1 being true, 0 being false. And the initial alpha character for the first significant word in each book title. We pass in a single letter, which could be the wildcard, or it could be the no return character, which is the hash mark. If we pass in the request to show everything, if show all is true, then we ignore any other filters and simply return all of the publication titles in a union query with 0 as publication ID and all publications for the publication title. This then is the row source for our publication combo box. If show all is passed in as a 0 or false, we have to check whether or not a category is requested. If a category is not requested, if a specific category is not requested, then we're not going to filter by category. And we're only going to filter on the initial letter in the first significant word in each publication title. The pub sort field is a calculated field which drops the leading the, an, or a in book titles to accomplish that goal. And again, we create a union with the 0 and all publications. If there is a filter, if genre ID or category ID is greater than 0, then we're going to filter on both the publication ID, both the category ID and the first letter of the first significant word. We do that by joining this subset of records to our main set of records. In both cases, if we pass in the do not show character, which is, again is the hash mark, we get no records back. So that's the general outline of a method to limit the impact of pulling records across the network or down from the cloud into a local access interface. We have leveraged the power of SQL Server, the ability to create a stored procedure, which does the calculations we need in the server, sending back from the database only the subset of records we absolutely need for our current task, allowing for the possibility that as a demo, I allowed you or allowed my user to request everything. In a production database, I would think very seriously about whether or not this option should be turned on. Beyond that, there are other things you can do. Views, which do some of the heavy lifting and combining and filtering and aggregating records, better done on the server, for example. Not writing queries that force access to download records in order to figure out what you want. I hope it has given you some ideas about how you can approach interface design in your Access applications to optimize interaction with a remote Access backend, hosted SQL Server backend, or SQL Azure backend. If you liked what you saw today, hit the like button. Let me know you like what you saw. Also, I appreciate it if you would subscribe to my channel so the next time I drop a video, you'll get notice of it. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.